You're listening to the O&P Check-in, an SPS podcast.
This podcast brings you the latest happenings in the O&P industry. We're unpacking trends and news from this tight-knit orthotics and prosthetics community.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Jackie Green. I'm a marketing specialist at SPS.
And I'm Brendan Erickson, regional sales manager here at SPS.
Welcome back to our listeners. If you're new to the O&P Check-in, here is what you can expect. In each episode, we provide a quick SPS update and discuss hot topics in O&P with leading professionals in the industry. Before we get started, let's hear a word from our sponsor. Access the power to restore upper limb function. Össur's iLimb Access is a myoelectric multi-articulating prosthetic hand with 5 individually powered digits and a manual rotating thumb. Available now through SPS. Ready to explore iLimb technology for your patients? Reach out to your SPS sales account manager today.
Thank you, Össur.
So, Brendan, what's going on over at SPS?
Well, you know, the end of the year is getting here fast. We're into Q4, and I know a lot of our listeners out there probably need to earn some of their CEU credits, which we've got absolutely over at our SPS online CEU course portal. Jackie, do you know how many courses and credits we offer?
So we have 21 CEU course credits available, and that accounts for about 14 different courses. So you can choose from different topics ranging from microprocessor feet to knees to AFOs to KFOs, and we even have one on marketing.
Very neat. Yeah, and it's pretty cool because they cover, all different brands, not just individual brands, and all different categories within, doing orthotics and prosthetics. So
yes,
very, very cool. Everyone, please visit the clinical services page by selecting the resources tab on spsco.com and get started earning those credits.
Or you can find the link in our show notes.
Okay, everyone. Jackie is on the road this week, and to fill in the void for her, if we ever could do such a thing, I am lucky to announce that I have Sam Brouillette, Manager of Clinical Education here at SPS, and certified prosthetist, and all-around clinical guru that blows my mind every time I speak with him. So let's get started.
All right. Hey, well, thank you for having me.
Okay, I'm thrilled to welcome today's guest, Ottobock's Director of Clinical Affairs and Certified Prosthetist Orthotist and Fellow of the Academy, Dr. Gerry Stark is here with us today. Welcome, Gerry.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so for our listeners out there who haven't met you, I doubt there's many out there, but could you give us a little background on yourself, how you got into the O&P profession, and just a little bit about yourself personally?
Oh, sure. So I guess, when I was a kid, I always liked $6 Million Man, but I didn't want to be the $6 Million Man. I wanted to be the engineer that made the artificial limbs for him. So that was kind of my goal. And when I was a kid, that's kind of what I really like doing. I like seeing how science and humans interact, right? So I thought engineers made prostheses because that's what I thought. Maybe some guidance would have been good for a career. But so I got a mechanical engineering degree and then started a career as a design engineer for a surgical instruments company. And then I thought, I started to do this for a reason. Let's get back to it. So I took a tour of Northwestern University back in, 1990. And they actually had an opening. I wasn't qualified to go, and yet they needed someone in 2 weeks. So since I was in the Chicago area, I got a great chance. So originally I thought I would do internal prosthetics, but I used to send out, applications, and our bar used to allow us to get a free beer with every rejection letter. And with me, I got 12 of them. And they said, Gerry, at some point we have to say that's enough, And so then I realized, I'm probably not going to get a job with internal prosthetics. But when I toured Northwestern, and all of a sudden everything just started to come together. And so that's kind of how I got started in the profession. And then I was fortunate enough to, I did a number of things as a student. Like I made simulators for clinical experience, and they thought that was pretty interesting. So I got the chance to come back as an instructor at Northwestern University. So that's how I got started.
Hey, Gerry, just kind of expand on everything. So your early days with Northwestern, and then You've done a lot of academia study. You've worked for some other manufacturers in different roles. Can you give
Mhm.
a quick history of what got you here today after
Yeah.
Northwestern?
So I can remember it specifically, Sam. So I was sitting in the first day of school at Northwestern, and I was sitting in a Northwestern sweatshirt because I thought that's what I should do. And then they said, no, you should wear a tie and a lab coat every day. So they kind of set me straight way back then. But Dr. Dudley Childress told me you should be equally adept in terms of research, development, clinical care, and education. And if you can be equally adept in all three of those and move between those circles, that's the dynamo that runs your career. And I thought, wow, that's really what I need to do. And that's how I knew I was in the right profession. So, I was at Northwestern. I was a clinical instructor for prosthetics. Being an instructor is very redeeming, and it's a wonderful career. And but then I really wanted to get back to designing products and developing things. And so I moved on to Hosmer, and Hosmer makes all the prosthetic hooks. And they were back then actually beginning to do lower limb and mechanical knees, hydraulic knees. And then they were purchased by FAAOP. So I got to experience that. And then FAAOP created an on-site clinic. And so I thought it was also important for me to be a consultant and be equally adept clinically. That charge by Dr. Childress, though, I never realized how difficult that is, right? To be equally adept in education, development, research. And by the way, they're two very different things. Development and research are very different. It took me 20 years to figure that out. And then in terms of clinical care, but being able to be accepted in all those circles is kind of hard, because always somebody, if you're an educator, if I'm with educators, they say, well, you're a manufacturer. If I'm with manufacturers, they say, well, you're more of a clinician. And with clinicians, they say you're an educator. So I never really belonged to any one group.
Well, I often see your surveys flying into my inbox from the O&P listserv.
Mhm.
Uh, can you talk a little bit about how your surveys came to be and how you go about picking a topic, or more recent in the most recent years?
I started my career really speaking on free papers about technical things like how polycentric knees work, right, as an engineer. And then I realized there's a bit of a shift in what people wanted to learn about. And one day I was doing a paper on upper limb acceptance, and I found out upper limb acceptance is about the same as it was in 1958. So I thought to myself, wow, all this stuff I'm learning about components, it's not as important as what we're doing and printing on the patients. So I moved with upper limb acceptance and realized, yeah, the prosthetist affects acceptance because they are imprinting on the patient. If the prosthetist has anxiety, worry, concern, sense of risk, that transmits to the patient, and then the patient maybe doesn't accept that prosthesis as readily. So usually one survey feeds into the other. There's usually something I want to ask more about. So most recently, I was actually doing a survey about, do we have too many students or not enough? Do we have too many schools or not enough? And so what I detected in the comment section is really where you find most of that qualitative data. You find that I saw that there was quite a bit of burnout. So I wanted to ask the field more specifically, what kind of burnout do we have? And what I found was 1 in 3 of us are suffering from burnout. On average, we're at risk for burnout, the entire profession. And then 1 in 10 of us are at burnout that's severe enough to affect us physically and also our job performance, definitely. And so I thought that was very interesting. But I had done an earlier survey on technology innovativeness, and I noticed certain correlations between the data, between the various years of experience. So I wanted to know, is burnout associated with technology innovativeness, right? Or how quickly you adopt new technology? And what I found was something kind of interesting. I found that there's a very high correlation between how optimistic you are about technology, maybe even unhealthily so. They call this a technologic seduction. We think technology will make it better, but technology itself doesn't make it better, we find. Scanning transfemorals is a fine tool, but you can scan transfemoral sockets faster and make them pour faster. So sometimes that tool just lets us do our job faster, And so the other thing I found though with that survey, when I correlated technology adoption, is that we also have an inverse relationship in terms of technologic innovativeness, meaning we're more reluctant to be the first one to implement processes. We're reluctant to be the first one to try something out and build things around it. So we're not as confident. So while they have a very high hope that technology will save them in the future, they don't want to be the first one to implement that. And then anecdotally, I would say as an instructor professionally to the group, I would say I would agree with that. As anxiety increases, like your revenue, or anxiety increases whether or not your company survives if you can deliver this arm that's super expensive, that really is a high risk. And sometimes you actually see that's why family members in smaller offices are the ones that actually fit those. Not the people who are most qualified. It's because of that sense of risk and trust.
I mean, so you hit a lot of important things there. I'm going to say for a layman like me, I'm going to ask you to back up just a second. I mean, you talked about anxiety. You talked about implementation of our mentality on the patients, or practitioners' mentality on patients. Let's take a step back. Can you just define burnout so that everyone's on the same page? And then you mentioned you wanted to study because you found it in there, but why did you think it was so important to study it?
Okay, so stress is the perception, it's a psychophysiologic response to a threat, real or imagined. So stress, that's what stress is. Chronic stress is called anxiety. So the chronic psychophysiologic response to stress over a long period of time. When this becomes a pathology, that's when it becomes burnout. That's when we are compromised. Our ability to deal with that anxiety long-term is compromised. Anxiety, you might feel anxiety for a lot of things. You might feel anxiety simply for just coming to work and there's just a lot of traffic. Usually stress and anxiety comes from where we cannot control what happens. And we as practitioners especially suffer from this because our lives are schizophrenic, because we evaluate ourselves in terms of how effective we are as clinicians. We value each other in terms of how much information they provide. And yet within our groups, how are we evaluated? We're evaluated by the amount of revenue we generate, when that's really not what we value anyway. So there's two types of groups. There's processual groups like engineers, and then there's human relational groups like sales and marketing. Clinicians ride right in the middle. And because they're bouncing back and forth, this creates an amount of stress. We really don't have any control sometimes over how much revenue we produce. So that creates chronic anxiety. Chronic anxiety over a long period of time leads to burnout. And that's why we have a burnout that's a little bit higher. Now, burnout is when you begin to suffer psychologically and physically. In using short terms, this is when you begin to alter how you perform. And here's the scary part. Burnout not only affects how you think and how you do things, and if you feel fatigued, burnout actually affects the physical architecture of your brain, because what it does is it grows the amygdala, which is your response, fight or flight, and it also decreases. There's actually a shaving of your neocortex. So if you're feeling stressed out, burned out, and you feel like, I just can't think. Have you ever been that way in a test? That's exactly, you're suffering the effects of stress, because you're actually thinking in a lower mammalian level of the triune brain. So you're thinking in terms of how do I survive this experience, more than trying to think in terms of the nuanced human thinking. Now, as clinicians, what are we asked to do? We're asked to sometimes listen to the patient, but also have trust in our own knowledge clinically. So we really have to be careful that we don't get too involved with that level of stress. And so how did I see things? Well, basically what I do is what we call, and this may be a cool word if you want to use it, but I do a qualitative feminology with the comments. What I do is I look for clumpings of interest, right? So if I see certain words that are used that refer to things, I start taking a tally. Now they can do this much more eloquently with software now. They just take tallies of different words used. But what I do is I begin to see the certain clumps of the qualitative data. Now I'm a quantoid, right? I believe in aggregated statistical data. And yet I think the qualitative data helps me know where to target and to drill down deeper. So for instance, I was seeing a lot of people talking about the volume of patients, not necessarily the number of patients they saw, but how much paperwork they were having to deal with. I saw them talk a lot about how the management was vague, how they didn't feel valued as an employee. I saw also a lot of disenchantment among the younger groups, right? And then just in terms of the types of things, they don't feel that they were in control of anything in terms of what they could affect, how they're evaluated. So that was part of the management thing. So that helps me retarget and apply the surveys. And to answer one more thing, Sam, the reason I use the surveys, because that's what I'm interested in, is I don't really have access to some of these cool biomechanic laboratory spaces, but I can ask very simple questions and then hopefully help the profession in some way.
Well, that actually leads into kind of my question. It was originally, what did you find in the analysis? But more importantly, I think from a very practical layman standpoint, and maybe going backwards, what did you find in these analysis? I mean, business owners, clinicians, I mean, who had the most burnout? I mean, what was going on with that?
Yeah.
I mean, what can we take home from this as clinicians?
So, yeah. So one of the things is among CPs, COs, and CPOs, the ones with the highest amount of burnout were CPOs. And one might say, well, why was that? Well, it was the sheer volume of what they had to know. So all the things they had to know, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, you could be a CP, CO, CPO, and that was 30% each, 33%, almost exactly 1/3 each. Now, if you look at the population, it's about 68% CPOs because all the students are CPOs, and it's all going to change over. There's only about 14% now of CPs and 12% of COs only. So CPOs have the highest amount of stress. We could suspect it's because of the volume of what they need to know and the types of patients. They can't even say, I'm only going to see prosthetic patients today. They can try, but that's not going to happen. When I looked in terms of region, or like what I mean is what type of office they work for, middle managers of major corporate or regional groups had the highest amount of stress because they're stuck in the middle. They're stuck between being a good clinician and being responsible for the revenue generation, which they may or may not have any control over. Another one that I asked about was years of experience. And this is something kind of interesting. I typically see 11 to 15 years associated with lower levels of technologic adoption, but also anxiety and stress. That's the lowest level, 0 or 11 to 15 years. That was interesting. In fact, if you look at, for instance, something like liner use, you'll see that 11 to 15 years, that's when their highest volume versus the expectation of their career. So usually that's correlated, and so I found that those were the most burned out, 11 to 15. Typically, 16 to 20 years should be second. So that should be the trough within our career. And then there's an uptick. So it should be where the most optimistic when we start, we get to the trough of 11, 15, and we see an uptick to when we're probably 25, 30 years in, we get about half of where we were when we started. And that's about it. What I saw was something really scary, actually, not to sound like a moment, but 0 to 5 was second highest with this burnout. Now, this could be due to COVID, but what happens is, I always think about these baseball parks that are old when they're built, like Camden Yards. What happens in 50 years? What they really look like really old by then? So what happens to our students that are 0 to 5 when they should be most optimistic and they hit 11 to 15 years? That's going to be a real danger because frankly, they're going to be overloaded. They're already overloaded. What happens when the real issues hit? Do they just start rejecting or abandoning the career? And we're starting to see abandonment of careers. That's a little scary.
All of this data now leads us to the question, how can we prevent this? Or how, once we're in a state of burnout? Is there something we can do? And I'll just give a shout out to Jimmy Capra, man. We did a podcast, and he said one of the best things to do is to stop, slow down, take inventory of what's around you, what you can affect and what you can't. Is there something similar there?
When we talk about reinforcing individual grit and perseverance, and we have to look at what things cause maybe a loss of self-efficacy or this sense of helplessness, and then what types of things override it. One is the slippery slope for burnout. I want to be a success, and I want to be a success at all times. And I want the money to correlate to, I want my sense of success to correlate to how much effort I've put into it. And that's just not the case. Sometimes you put a tremendous amount of effort for very little return initially. So sometimes you have to deal with that miscorrelation. The second, that grind high achiever, I'm going to attack this like a spider monkey. Sometimes all you do is end up getting yourself really tired and nothing happens. And that gets frustrating. 3 is admitting when you feel overwhelmed. You just feel like you've said yes to everything. I used to volunteer for so many different things, but you got to be able to define yourself and say no and refocus. The 4th one is really feeling like I'm not doing a good job, but never really giving yourself that internal, hey, you did a good job. You did the best you could. And that actually has people lose their self-confidence. The 5th one is I have to keep going. One of the things I've noticed about innovators, they know when to quit. They know when to drop things and refocus faster than others. And I have to say, many people are faster than myself. I just keep working with it, and we have that sunk cost fallacy, right? I'll just keep investing more time and money, and it will overcome all. No, it doesn't. Usually, pretty well. And then I've got nothing left, right? You just work yourself until there's just nothing left, and that's too late. You're already suffering burnout, and now it's tough to get out. You've really dug yourself a deep hole. So here are 10 things to help with mental toughness, though. The grit, how to come out of that. 1 is be honest with yourself. Mental toughness means being able to take critique from others and take critique from yourself constructively. Don't destroy yourself. If you're going to take an accounting, take a proper accounting. 2 is ask a question. Ask questions to define it, because sometimes you're not completely right. You've misrepresented that. 3rd thing is write out a daily goal that you can achieve. You can achieve it. And that helps you to feel like, wow, I had a determination. Even if you choose not to do something, say that you chose not to involve yourself and you're fulfilling that goal. It's not like writing checklists that you did already and you check it off, you feel good. But if you can write something every day, the other thing is get your workout in. I don't know what that workout is. Is it 10 push-ups in the morning and 10 sit-ups? I don't know, just something. Is it leaning against a counter and pushing 10 times? Is it going for a walk with your dogs? Do something physically that will train your brain and pull it away from being so internalized. Socrates used to talk about this. That's where peripatetic education comes from. The other one is wake up 15 minutes earlier than you do normally. Get up 15 minutes earlier and make your bed. I know that sounds silly, but that artifact is important because it helps you kind of have a little bit of contemplation, and then your bed is made when you go home. Do this. Don't work through lunch. Take time to eat your lunch. Clinicians don't do this. Another one is turn your phone off occasionally, completely off, not airplane mode, not silenced, off. The human brain is not meant for what we have asked it to do. This causes anxiety. Don't try to do the hardest task first, always. We talk about low-hanging fruit. What that is just getting you going. So try to look at those things and then take 30 seconds of a mental cold shower just to kind of cool yourself off. We run pretty hot during the day. And another one is practice forgiveness. Practice forgiveness for those who have wronged you during the day, those who have wronged you through the month and over the years. Call them up, talk to them. You don't even have to say, I forgive you. You just have to say, I let this go. Sometimes even within families, I've seen so many families destroyed because of that. And I think those are 10 things that can help you build toughness. Remember, in terms of engineering, toughness is not stiffness. They're not the same. Toughness is when a blade can bend, but comes back to its original shape. So bend, don't break. So that's what tempering is all about. So toughness is not about stiffness. Stiff things break because they're non-ductile. They won't bend with it. I'm anthropomorphizing metal. How's that? And then so toughness is bending, not breaking.
What's next? Do you have any plans for rolling out another survey? I'm sure you will. Nobody's stopping you from rolling out surveys. If you could give us a teaser or just even what you're thinking about.
Well, the one thing stopping me is people getting so bored and fatigued of surveys,
And people asking your time for a podcast, I guess, too.
No, that's always the great part. It's great to be of any value to anyone. But for me, it's always, I guess I have to say, I look for things in my personal journey. And one of the things about the burnout has been this idea about grit. How gritty can people be? What things do they do to improve their grit? Because I did present the burnout lecture, and one of my friends said, well, that's depressing. And so I thought to myself, yeah, maybe that we need to turn around and ask people how they successfully manage their anxiety and move forward. Here's the thing. We all have stress. And some of it is very positive, actually. The stress we have when we're generating something is actually, it generates new things. It's when it becomes exhaustive and fatiguing. So this comes down to what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talked about in terms of flow. Mm-hmm. So when have you ever done something and you just become oblivious to time? That's when you're in a state of flow. And I think clinicians have this because they really look for that sense of fulfillment. Like sales and marketing, they do look for public accolade and they look for bonus and incentives. But clinicians are a little bit more like engineers. They want to know that they were effective. They're willing to put up with discomfort as long as it was worth something to somebody. And so when they're in that state of flow, that can't be replaced.
Do you think there's a natural tendency to burn out because if you're doing your job as a clinician, that means maybe your patient isn't coming back as much because you've done such a good job and they're not coming back for a refit or XYZ is broken, and maybe there's just a propensity to have negativity come back through the doors rather than positivity come back through the doors?
I don't know if there's a natural tendency. I think, that's whether or not you're an optimist or pessimist, right? I do think we put there's this thing called emotional labor. And so teachers suffer from this, flight attendants suffer from this. It's where you have to have this image of confidence. And so even if you don't know what to do next, you have to you practice your clinical, I understand. Even though you're like, I have no idea what to do next. The thing is that that's an emotional labor. So that's what we project and what we are. And then also in terms of how we're measured and how we measure ourselves. Those are two very different things. And I think and maybe that's a new area to go. Maybe that's something for you. I think that's where that chasm between what our expectations are of ourselves as clinicians and what we can really deliver. Older clinicians are willing to accept they can't solve the world.
So, Gerry, great talking to you. Is there anything else just that you want to add? Something like Brendan said, something we can look forward to? Or are you speaking in any meetings coming up in the next year that we can kind of stalk you at?
Oh, I guess I'm going to the New Jersey chapter meeting in November. So I'm going to be there. I guess the thing is to keep asking questions and really looking at what you do well. There's 5 things you should do. One is to understand what business you're in. And we could say O&P. Well, no, it's rehabilitation. What's that mean to you? And then what are you doing to differentiate yourself? Are you really actively trying to make sure that someone understands I'm different, I'm unique? Or are you just kind of going along with the flow? The next one is to understand your competitive structure, right? So where are things and where do they fit in terms of what we're giving to patients? The next one is to ask yourself, what are your competencies? And therefore, what is your deficiencies? And to just be honest with yourself. And then the 5th one is to understand who it is you work for. And when you look at the value chain, who owns the information and who owns the payment? And that's the payers. And I have to tell you something that changed in my career. It went from manufacturers knowing the information to the providers owning that information. Now, guess who owns the information? It's the payers. So we may feel like the patient is our customer, but in a way they're not. It's the payer. And sometimes, though, we deal with that inequity here if we really want to be successful. That's a hard discussion, isn't it?
It is.
It's unique too. And I think people will start, after listening to this, thinking about that. I mean, I talk all day long to people about paying sources, and seeing them as a customer is a whole new viewpoint that I think could change A, how you deal with them, and B, maybe your perception of their role in everything.
But if we don't tell the narrative or the story of how that patient looks successful, or what success looks like, the payer doesn't care. It's kind of like education, right? Who is the customer in education? And you might say, well, the student. That's not true. If the student were the customer, then there'd be no tests. There'd be no attrition rate, because there would just be more and more people going to school. The real customer might be the future companies that hire these people. The true customer might be society, right? So the student really is not the customer. And in many ways, the patient isn't necessarily the customer. And while we do try to make them happy, and in the end, they represent something, but the payer is the one. And so we have to get better at telling good data-based stories. And data doesn't have to always be quantitative. It's not a number always. Sometimes it's a qualitative data point, which I just mentioned.
Yeah, I actually like that. And it kind of how it relates to the whole burnout scheme. We've been combative maybe with payer sources. We don't see them as the customer.
Mm-hmm.
And when we see the payer as the customer, that allows us to treat the patient, right? And we have that relationship as if they are our customer, then we can possibly start understanding, and they can understand us. And then
Right.
now we've got this contentment that, yeah, we actually got to do what we need to for the patient. We got paid for it. And now I'm feeling a lot better.
Exactly. We have to empathize with maybe the other side, because we're also imprinting on each other. So exactly, well said, Sam. You have to understand what they're looking for, and they're looking for value from you. Are you really providing it? Or are you just saying you are? So what are you backing that up with?
Well, and the proof's in the pudding there, because then you have a positive cycle of further referrals once you make that relationship. So
exactly. And it's all based on trust. And one of the reasons they push back is, quite honestly, they don't trust you. They don't trust that you have the patient's best interest in mind. Why is that?
Wow. Well, I'll leave us with that question. And I mean, it's like this overarching thing that maybe we come back and do part 2 with you. But I'll be the first to thank you for everything that you've laid out for us, and all the light bulbs that are going across the nation, turning on right now as people are driving home from their shop, listening to the O&P Check-in. So thank you for your time. Thank Ottobock for your time. We certainly appreciate you.
Gerry, as always, thank you. It's
You're
always for the last 25 plus years, just having the honor to listen to you.
Thank you, everyone. And you're doing wonderful. And to all the practitioners that are listening, thank you for all that you do, and take care of yourself. Take care of yourself, because you need to be there to help the future patients. So thank you for all that you do.
Well, there you have it. Thank you for listening to the O&P Check-in, an SPS podcast.
If you like what you hear, hit the subscribe button on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please rate and review the show to help fellow O&P professionals find us.
We'd also like to hear from you directly. What topics do you want us to cover? Do you have any burning questions? Email us with your thoughts and feedback at spspodcast@spsco.com. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.